Welcome to Farm Year Daily, a field-forward podcast. I'm your host, David Geiger. Today on Farm Year Daily, disease pressure continues in north-central Iowa. We speak with agronomist Angie Rieck-Hinz. Then a look at Chinese demand and recent crop projections with Reese Drenth of Ground Level Dispatch. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at FieldForwardPod. We would love to have you join our community, keeping folks informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Year Daily. And joining me on Farm Here Daily, we have Angie Rieck-Hinz, ISU Extension Agronomist for the north central, maybe northwestern part of the state, kind of a little bit of an encompassing area up there. Angie, so good to have you on the program again. Glad to have you here. And we are at the end of August. How are you doing? How are the fields you oversee doing?
Thanks, David, for having me. I'm doing well. I'm greatly enjoying this cooler weather, that's for sure. It makes looking at things in the field a lot more comfortable, I'll tell you that much. Things, we're winding up things. This corn crop is changing very quickly in north central Iowa. When you go away for a week and you come back, you're like, oh, wow, man, that really changed in the last couple of days. But even last week, day to day, you could see this crop changing. Two reasons, right? Number one is the amount of disease pressure we have, at least southern rust, continues to be a topic of concern and continues to expand in its scope. And then number two is we're just at that point in the season where things are starting to change, right? We're headed towards harvest and that crop is maturing and slowly drying down. And so we would expect to see those changes out there. Might be happening a little bit more rapidly this year than usual.
So let's go into that disease pressure because we've heard a lot about southern rust this season. What does it appear to be doing in north central Iowa? Did fungicides get placed on there? Did it kind of persist through some of the applications? And are we also seeing some disease in soybeans?
We are. In terms of southern rust, for those people who did apply a fungicide right about the third week of July or so, generally speaking, that fungicide seems to be doing its job. It's, we get about 3 weeks of residual. Some companies will tell you longer on that, but about 3 weeks of residual on that fungicide application. So stuff that's had fungicide on it seems to kind of be holding its own. Things that, and if it was applied way too early, it definitely has kind of blown through that residual. So more disease is taking over. Things that didn't have a fungicide on it, in a lot of cases, a lot of that upper canopy is already to the point it's dead, right? So we are hitting R6 or physiological maturity in some of these fields already. When I look at growing degree days, we're anywhere from 3 to 8 days ahead on our growing degree days because it was so warm this summer. So between that and between this disease pressure, we're pushing maturity a lot faster than usual right now. So it's kind of shocking to see that, but there are a lot of fields where that upper canopy is dead, and we are very close to black layer if we're not already there.
North central Iowa, you were just saying ahead on growing degree days. Was that helped along by some of the I guess rain as well? And what did you guys end up season wide for the corn and soybean crop up there?
Oh, wow. I'm not sure I can give you a season total.
That's okay. That's okay.
It was still raining this last weekend, right? There are places that are pushing 30 inches already for the year. And, our normal rainfall is about 32 inches, 34 inches. So we've almost got an entire year's worth of rain in the first 7 to 8 months. It's pretty phenomenal in places. I wouldn't say the rain necessarily. The rain is probably doing a lot. At least we're probably shallow rooted. I'm concerned about that for standability if we get a rain in our corn crop. But definitely the heat this year. It's been warm since June. And I think we all are ready for this cooler weather, but that crop just came along a lot faster because it was a lot warmer than usual for a lot longer period of time. So I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing that advanced growing degree day unit number.
Moving back to some of the pest issues, have you had any issues so far? As you mentioned, some of it's already nearing that end date. We are almost at the end of August here. Maybe some early harvest would be happening in 2-3 weeks if folks wanted to have some wet corn in the bins. But when you're looking at that process, have you seen much insect pressure here later on in the season?
Insect pressure has been relatively quiet this year, right? We obviously always see rootworm pressure in corn. I can't even say that the rootworm pressure was as great as it's been in some years. I can't say that I noticed that, but I don't have our trapping data in front of me either. In soybeans, right, there's still continued Japanese beetle feeding in the outside rows of those soybeans. That's not uncommon, but not a lot of pest pressure, right? A few soybean aphids here and there. I don't know that we've ever reached anything that's reached threshold. They don't like the warmer weather, but you could find aphids in field, but nowhere close to that treatment level for treatment threshold, right? So, but there's probably some places where they got that high, but generally speaking, that pressure was really low this summer as well. So it's been insect wise, I think it's been, at least up here, pretty quiet. I know, fall armyworms in southern Iowa eating alfalfa and pastures has been a concern the last week or two from my colleagues, but I have not experienced that up here.
Now, in terms of early looks at the crop, we have had USDA estimates at the beginning of the month expecting bin buster crops. We just had the 2025 Pro Farmer Crop Tour roll through the state, averaging 198.43 bushels per acre statewide. And then the soybean pod count was averaging 1,562. Some of those numbers seemed a little bit, at least on the corn side, on the lower end of what we typically get. But what does that mean? What are you seeing in north central Iowa?
Depending, David, an extension answer is always it depends, right? So when you look at the counties I cover, um, there are some really good looking corn out there, right? That southern Webster County area looks good. Parts of Hamilton County look good. Parts of Hardin County look good. But the further north you go, where we got a lot more rain, that crop is a little bit yellower, right? Probably been a little bit more deficient on nitrogen for the whole growing season. I could see, I would anticipate we're not going to see the yields we saw last year. Um, I, at least in terms of corn. Soybeans are going to kind of depend, right? We're still in August and we're still filling grain on those soybeans, but we are seeing a lot of sudden death in those soybeans. So they are rapidly, in some places, dying quickly too. So we may not be outrunning that disease in terms of filling those pods. I don't really have a good handle on what I would say for soybeans, but I'm not surprised that our yield predictions are a little bit lower than usual just because it's been extremely wet, right? I mean, the last 2 weeks have not been, but the whole growing season has been up until now. We have a lot of disease pressure that might have impacted the photosynthetic capacity of that upper canopy in corn. So a lot of ears, when you go into fields and look, a good chunk of ears are tipped back at least an inch or so. And it's really hard to judge the rest of the ear, right? Based on genetics, like how big around it should be or how long it should be. But there's quite a bit of tip back out there. It's really going to depend on if you're one of those people that got just the right amount of rain at the right time, or if you're one of those people that just constantly got hammered with rain. And there's people that were getting 4 and 5 inches of rain a week, right? And so it's just it's going to be yield limiting for sure.
As we do approach harvest, we, as you're just talking about, some stock health issues we're worried about. We also saw lots of rain, very wet weather, so might have some soil issues as well as folks are trying to get machinery in and out. What are the things you're watching for? What are the questions you are getting ahead of that season?
Yeah, right now things are pretty quiet. I'm still getting fungicide phone calls. I haven't got any harvest questions yet, but a couple of things that I think are on my mind. Number one, stock quality. Every single field I've been in, I've been pushing stocks or pinching stocks, and you can collapse quite a few stocks. The stock quality generally just isn't there this year, and it's not surprising given the fact that if we had a lot of disease pressure, we probably started cannibalizing that plant. So I would tell people they really do need to go out and evaluate their fields for that stock quality and standability and make sure you have a plan to prioritize fields for harvest. I think that's important. Um, I hope we dry some of these areas out a little bit more before we get in the field with some equipment so we don't leave ruts and cause further compaction. Ruts aren't too hard to take care of, right? But that deeper subsoil compaction can be a lifelong challenge to remediate. So I think that bears some thought process there. And then I'm also thinking about all this disease pressure out there and all this rust, right? Like we're still coming out of fields orange colored, and eventually that stuff's going to turn black. I'm worried about the dust and people's health being in those fields. So I think, the idea of wearing a N95 mask when you're in the combine, or at least you're hauling grain or in the field, might not be such a bad idea, right? People can kind of scoff at that, but it's going to be a very dirty harvest, in my opinion. So
That's absolutely something to keep in mind because I didn't even think about that. But yeah, it probably already is not fun as you're walking through, uh, beyond the itchiness on your skin, but just breathing it in.
yeah, yesterday I was in and out of a couple of fields, and I was a little orange yet. My clothes were orange, my hair was orange. And to be honest, just breathing when you're in there, right? When you come out and blow your nose, it's not sad to say, folks, but it's something you need to think about this fall. It's, clean those combine cabin filters frequently. There's a lot more dried down early material there. Think about cleaning that combine and blowing things off. We're probably going to need to think about some field fires, right? We had some early premature death on some of those plants. Just things to think about as we head into fall. I know people are sitting there listening right now. There's a lot of combines parked in yards. People are already working on their combines. Just things to keep in mind. It was pretty dusty, dirty fall last year as well. But I think this year, because of all that southern rust, it's going to be a lot worse.
Keep some work safety in mind. Don't be a Willy Wonka with some of the Oompa Loompas coming out of the field there.
That's a good way to say that. Yep.
Angie Rieck-Hinz is an ISU Extension agronomist for North Central Iowa, joining me on Farm Here Daily. Angie, always good to have you here. We'll have to talk again later. Thank you so much for your analysis, and thanks for being on the program.
Thanks, David. I hope everybody has a good fall.
This is Farm Here Daily. We will have more conversations on the way, but first, let's take a look at the marketplace. There was a mixed trade at the close for Tuesday. September corn, a penny and 3/4 weaker, 387.5. December falling 2 3/4, 409.5. Soybeans in September, 3 1/4 cents higher, 10.28 3/4. November rising a penny and 3/4, 10.49.5. Soybean meal in September, $1.50 a ton in the green, $297.20. September wheat, 2 3/4 more, 509.5, with December rising 2 cents at 531 3/4. In the livestock market, close for Tuesday, October live cattle up $1.37, 238.20, with December rising $1.87, 239.92. Feeder cattle in September, $3.15 a hundredweight higher, $365.05, with October rising $3.02 at $363.77. Lean hogs in October, $2.02 a hundredweight more, $93.42, with December rising $1.17 at $85.92 a hundredweight. That is the Tuesday market close. This is Farm Year Daily. And joining me on Farm Year Daily, we have the folks from the Ground Level Dispatch. And if you aren't aware of the Ground Level Dispatch, they break down the markets twice a day. They give farmers the essential information needed for grain prices as well as input costs, helps them make smarter marketing decisions. And if you are interested in cutting through the noise and knowing what matters, go to groundleveldispatch.com and subscribe today. We have a month free trial that we have for Farm Year Daily, and we can talk about that near the end of this conversation. Reese Drenth is with us. Reese, we've chatted with you a few times. Glad to have you back on the program. Love the interesting things that you have in mind in the marketplace. Good to have you. We spoke with John last week, Reese this week. Great time. Reese, thanks for joining us. And the topic of the week seems to be China. Can you kind of jump into that?
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's been great so far. China's definitely the topic of conversation here in the grain market this week and late last week also. If you pull the memory back, Thursday, Friday, we had a few things go down. We had the Secretary of the Treasury allegedly talking about how the U.S. is close to some sort of trade agreement with China and that they're going to purchase soybeans. And you also had rumors that the Chinese were poking around looking for offers out of the Gulf and the Pacific Northwest for export beans. Then to start off the week yesterday, you basically had a complete revision of those rumors. Oh man, China's not coming. Over the weekend, a Chinese trade official apparently spouted off something about how, the U.S. shouldn't escalate things. And then today you had markets were marginally higher on the hopes that, again, something happens. I mean, beans were up 7 cents. They closed up a penny. Not a fantastic day for soybeans by any means, but, again, the trade is kind of driven by buying the rumor, right, that the Chinese are coming and then selling the fact that they haven't yet. So as far as the headlines, that's what's happening. As far as what's actually happening in the cash trade, if you've got X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, if you've subscribed to a lot of the news wires or YouTube videos out there, you can probably see it. The cash market, right? So what farmers can get as far as a posted bid at a bean plant or an elevator or export house along the rivers system is very, very, very weak historically. You've got bean basis in places that are export corridors only for beans, North and South Dakota, Western Minnesota, Nebraska, on their butts, to put it nicely. And farmers getting worse than $1 under the board for their harvest beans, whereas recently as last year, the year before, they're getting 60, 70, 80 cents better than that. Okay, that's a real thing. Traders tell us that if they wanted to sell bean trains today for harvest execution in Iowa, the heart of Iowa, the best number they can sell is like $1 under the November futures, which the last time that happened was 2018. I think we've talked about that before too. So it's the cash market still hasn't reared its head and told us, hey, the Chinese are here, regardless of the headlines. And until the cash market tells us the Chinese are here, we're probably going to do this song and dance where we go up on a rumor and down because nothing happens. The cash market has to tell us with actual purchases that the Chinese are here. And when that happens, you'll see it. You'll see it in futures. You'll see it in basis if it's big enough. You'll see it in spreads, the difference between November futures and January 2026, March 2026, July 2026. You'll see it happen everywhere. But until then, we're just going to bounce up and down here. And the last thing I'd add on the Chinese topic is contacts we have in the actual export market have told us that this week there's this week feels even better than last week as far as the Chinese are coming. This week is the week they're going to buy U.S. beans. Still hasn't
And to
happened yet.
emphasize that importance, right? It is a big deal because we have a new crop that's on the way, and we only have so much time before Brazil's new crop shows up as well.
Yeah,
What's kind of that space we have left before we really need to sell a lot of these beans?
we have the last part of September, October, November, December, January, and historically a little bit of February. That's our window. What we'll call that last 15 of September, the first 15 of February. So that's October, November, December, January, 5 months. Okay. And the actual cash trade that's happened has confirmed that the Chinese have bought all of their September needs and most of their October needs already from Brazil.
Really? Wow.
So now the U.S. is down to November, December, January, and a little bit of February. Okay. And, before you know it, if it dries out in Brazil, they're going to be planting early soybeans. That'll be the next problem for the market to solve. And then if they plant early enough, those soybeans become for sale last part of January, first part of February. So we're at the witching hour. Every day that goes by, we really need to see some export sales put on. And if not, there is still hope in the RVO, the government basically saying, hey, U.S. fuel makers, you need to blend X amount of biofuel in the U.S. fuel supply. Okay, that's demand. We're legislating demand. There is still hope maybe, and there's been a lot of beans that have had a lot of wet feet over the last couple months. Maybe the yield's not there. Okay, all hope isn't lost, but we need export demand for our soybeans, and we are running out of time. So that's why everybody's talking about it. And again, this week apparently is the week. Okay, but we cannot keep shuffling our feet. Next week can't be the week, and the week after that can't be the week. We need to see something now.
Right. And that's a big deal for producers because, as much as the markets can shift around, what matters to them is that cash price. And as you said, that is what is struggling the most here.
Yeah, and a lot of farmers, especially in this part of the country, Iowa, Nebraska, Illinois, they don't want to store beans at home. They want to store corn. And so when you have a good cash price off the combine, $10, $11, $12, whatever, a lot of times they just sell them, defer the money if they don't need the money and they don't want to pay taxes, and store your corn and haul your corn when the market calls for it after the first of the year. Okay, but if you don't get that, if your elevator is posted $1.50 under the board and futures are $10 and you're getting $8.50 for your beans, that throws a wrench in a lot of plans. Okay, and beans aren't easy to store. They aren't easy to store, and also they're a more expensive commodity, and interest on a more expensive commodity is more expensive. The longer you wait to sell those beans, the larger your interest expense becomes on storing those soybeans. So it is not ideal. The cash price will struggle also from a basis perspective, not even futures, but a basis perspective if we don't start exporting these beans. Now, I will say that U.S. beans are so cheap that the economics work, and we've written about this too. The economics work for Brazil to import U.S. beans and crush them and export their own beans, or import U.S. beans and then leg them and then re-export them to China. That's how cheap U.S. beans are. So from a cash trader's perspective, right, if you're a soybean trader in Brazil and your job is to make money and you can make money doing that, that's going to happen, right? Just like sometimes the U.S. imports Brazilian beans into the Southeast when things get way too expensive. The opposite can happen also. To what extent can it happen? I don't know, but we're so cheap right now. Somebody should buy these beans. They're too cheap. And you can bet degenerate traders who their job is to make cents per bushel, they will figure out a way to do it. So
I believe it. I want to talk about production because you mentioned that was something you guys were watching as well. We had that USDA report at the beginning of August. We're now, quite a bit since then. And in that time, we had the Pro Farmer Crop Tour where they had less than, what Iowa expected in terms of bushels per acre for corn, at least. What were some of the takeaways you had from some of these recent crop inspections and developments?
Great question. So I might take a contrarian approach to a lot of the chatter I've seen about Pro Farmer, at least on, Ag Twitter, Ag X or whatever. I think the Pro Farmer data is actually not bullish, not friendly to price. A lot of folks say, well, they came at 182 and the USDA is at 188. Haha, USDA, there's no way you get to a 188 yield. And I agree with that. But for me, I used to run a crop tour logistically and collect the data for it in my previous life. And it was never about the actual number. Okay, it's about the change year over year. Because good luck predicting yield, right? Congratulations.
Right.
You might get lucky 2 out of every 10 years. But it's more about how has this year changed from the 5-year average, or how has this year changed from last year? And in most areas, the Pro Farmer Tour came in ahead of last year's numbers. And we had a record corn and bean crop in this country last year. Okay, the pod counts, except for 2 or 3 states maybe, were higher, and the yield estimates except for 2 or 3 states were higher. So to me, that confirms that we are going to have a bigger crop this year than last year, as long as nothing crazy happens. So for all intents and purposes, Pro Farmer confirmed that, hey, we got big crops coming, which, circling back around, is another reason why we need some export demand, especially on soybeans.
I think immediately, what stage of big crop is factored into the market after that USDA report to now? Did the market really go deep on we're going to have a huge crop, or was it kind of cagey? And it still continues to be cagey.
So you bring up a great point. We are perplexed, specifically by the corn market trade post-August USDA report. And we've read some good articles, opinion. We've had plenty of good conversations about it because we're trying to get smarter every day when it comes to this corn trade. But the data that came out, and we talked about this when we talked about the report last time we spoke. So the data that came out on August 12th should equate to $3.50 corn and $11 beans. But that doesn't happen, right? The bean market action here makes sense. We can explain that. 975 is way too cheap for the carryout that USDA was predicting. Now we're having trouble making new highs because we have no export demand. Makes sense. Great. Corn, the fact that we've been so resilient since the week of that report is pretty perplexing. And there's a couple, I won't take credit for this. There's a couple traders in the marketplace that I think that have done a really nice job explaining this. And it feels simpler than it is. A market that can't go down won't go down. So a couple things on that front. First of all, with what export demand that we have on corn and what domestic demand we have on corn, that's keeping futures markets in the game. Secondly, the market's job is to take what it knows today, discount it, and try to predict what the price of corn or beans or whatever should be tomorrow or December or March or May. We don't care about what's happened. We care about trying to discount what we think will happen and what we know today and establishing a fair value down the road. That's why they're called futures markets, not today markets. Congratulations. We figured out we've got a big crop, right? USDA came out with 188 and 53 and change. We've got big crops. Now what? Now what problems do we have to solve as a marketplace? And I think that philosophy or that function is why corn markets have been so resilient. Great, big crops out there. Check that. We've been trading that for the last 5 months while we took corn from 480 to 392. We traded that successfully. Now what problems do we have to solve? Is the farmer going to sell corn sub $4? Probably not. Are we going to find a bunch of export demand with corn so cheap? Probably. Is Brazil going to plant more beans than corn because they still have a great leg up on the U.S. as far as export demand if China's just not going to buy any U.S. beans. Maybe. Are input prices too expensive? Do we need to raise the price of corn to incentivize corn planting since corn demand is so strong in the U.S.? These are all problems that now it's time for the market to solve those problems versus like, yeah, the crop's big. And so hopefully that makes sense, but like that's the function of the market, right? We've talked about yield and production so much. We confirmed it. Great. Now what? And to me, to us, the now what, corn market has a few problems to solve. There's a few unknowns that need to become known, and that's worth something. And that's probably why corn isn't 375 right now. It's 410, 409, or wherever we closed it.
Reese Drenth is with the Ground Level Dispatch. Thank you so much for joining us on Farm Here Daily. We do have a month free trial with you guys. If folks were to click the link that's going to be in the description below, what would they be able to find? What would they be able to enjoy from that month free trial?
Yeah, we try to send out quick, easy to read, digestible information twice a day, once early in the morning and once kind of mid to late afternoon. Try to walk through the highlights of what happened in the grain marketplace, and sometimes we'll go into more detail. Like last night, we wrote a little bit more about the big beautiful bill and how it impacts crop insurance. Sometimes we'll talk about fertilizer markets in a little more depth, usually every Friday. So, and then on the weekends, we like to write 2 to 3 editorials a month, talk about things that are important to us. Working on right now to talk about rail markets. That'll come out this weekend. Looking forward to that. So, hope you enjoy.
This is Farm Here Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Again, in order to continue to produce this type of local content, we would love to have you join our community. So please follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. You can also find me on social media at Geiger Reports. Again, I'm your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody.